Hello and welcome to another PLO8 hand review. This time we've got something a little bit different for you. What we're going to do is we're going to have a look through at a number of hands, quite a few hands actually, not all of them, from the final table of a $22 pot limit Omaha High-Low tournament, MTT. So a few of the things you'll notice are differences from the sit and goes that we normally cover. These games we tend to be a bit more aggressive. Survival is rewarded less than winning. You really need to come, with the field sizes these days, you really need to come top three or better to be making money. So anyway, let's get right into it and see what happens here. See what our player does. Okay. And he raises to steal. Well, he's also raising for value with that hand. Pretty standard. Okay, let's move right along. Okay, it's a little while later. We've got a suited ace deuce hand. There's a limp. We limp behind. Limping behind is not such a bad option in this case. It's not that we're afraid to raise. It's just that we're reasonably strong and we want to have a go at taking this guy's stack. We don't want to fold him out. And we also don't want someone else to make a small raise that he comes over the top of, and then we end up having to play for our whole stack in early position. Okay, there's been a raise. We make the call. Our hand is good enough to call here with the stack size, especially from a late position raise. Okay, so we check that flop. Now our opponent comes out and bets the pot. This is a classic case of where all we've got is a low draw, so we're just going to lay this down. There's no point in drawing heads up for a low only. Okay, let's move along. Just a few hands later, we're in the big blind. Fairly mediocre hand, 10-10, and with 6-5 kickers for the low. Okay, we take a free flop. All right, now we're flop trips. Now, the exact reverse principle of what we were talking about before, where we don't draw to a low only, this now works in our favor. We can put out a bet here, and we should get low draws to fold. Check. Okay, we bet. That's a little more than half the pot. That's all we need. Okay, we do get called by that player behind us. Now let's see. The low hasn't come, so here, yep, we come out and bet again. Bets the pot. We're pretty sure this player down here is on some sort of low draw. Maybe he's got a combo low flush draw, but he's not going to like this at all, and he folds. Yep. So here, again, we were reversing the principle of it's really bad idea to draw to a low only on a dangerous board, and especially heads up. And now we've used that principle to our advantage to fold out what was most likely a low draw. Okay, let's move along. Okay, the very next hand, we've pulled up a reasonable sort of hand in the small blind. Okay, it's been raised from early position, and a call, and our player folds. And the reason, you might look at that and say, well, hey, we can play a flop with that, but not. We've got an 8 in our hand, which is pretty much dead weight. It's not helping us much. It's loosely connected to the jack, but it doesn't, we're not going to make any nut hands usually. 7, 9, 10 is the only nut board. And playing it out of position is a bad idea, so our player correctly folds in that spot. Okay, let's move along. All right, just a few hands later, we've pulled up a pretty good hand here. Double suited aces with 3-4 kickers. That's pretty good. Player comes in for a standard 2 times raise. Okay, we get 3-bet by the button. Now, this button player, he's reasonably aggressive. We should 3-bet this because, and we do, and the reason to 3-bet here is we don't want to be playing a flop with a lot of chips behind out of position, especially against an aggressive player. We're going to have a huge equity advantage with our cards here. So we 3-bet, hopefully he'll 4-bet. If not, with the amount of chips we've got left behind, it's all going in regardless of what comes on the flop. All of it must go in on the flop if it doesn't get in pre-flop. Okay, he just calls. Oh, we don't like that board much at all, but like we said, we've got to jam this into the flop. There's every chance he's got ace deuce the way he's 3-bet us, but we've got to play. Okay, well, as I said, he was an aggressive player. He's 3-bet us light, and he's called on a paired board. where it's highly likely with us raising that we have ace deuce in our hand. So he's prepared to chance his hand at a flush. I'm not really liking our opponent's situation, but again, he had to call. There were so many chips already in the pot. He was getting such good odds. So anyway, the hand plays out. Our opponent makes the flush, but of course we make the nut low, and we're happy with the outcome. I would have preferred to have won it, but the important principle there is we don't want to be playing flops out of position, especially against an aggressive player. So that's why we tried to get as much of the stack in as possible before the flop. Okay, let's move along. Okay, a little bit later, we've pulled up a pair of aces with 7-9 kickers. Now, the reason I'm showing this one, we've got 20 blinds in our stack. The reason I'm showing it is players who are new to the game think, oh, well, I've got aces, I'm going to put this in. But no, our low is so incredibly weak that there's just no way we're going to play this out of position. Our player correctly folds, and that's exactly what you do with a very weak pair of aces in a split pot game. You really need to have wheel kickers if you're going to play a hand like this out of position. Okay, let's move along. All right, a little while later, we've still got nearly 20 blinds. Let's see what happens here. A limp and a raise. I like this raise here. We're in position, and so, we don't mind playing a big pot in position. With this hand, it's a fairly strong hand. If we're lucky, we'll isolate that short stack who limped, and he just makes the call. That's a terrible play by this guy here with his stack size. He should have re-raised to get his whole stack in. Instead, he's now going to be playing a pot out of position post flop with a small stack. It makes no sense. Okay. Oh, and our player has flopped big. We've flopped a set with the nut low draw. All these chips are going in. Our opponent makes it easy for us. And yeah, he's gone with just one pair. He should have got this all in pre. The small chance that we might have folded, our player might have folded, was worth it. If he's going to play the hand, he's got to play it for keeps. You just can't half play a hand like our opponent just did. Anyway, he's out of the game. Let's move along. Here we are a little while later. 2 players have exited the final table, so just 7 of us left. And you have to open up a bit more. As you start getting shorter and shorter, you've got to open up a bit more. Whilst we might not be enthusiastic about raising aces with only a 5 kicker, I mean, at 10, at least it connects for a Broadway. But of course, there's only exactly one board that makes a straight on, with the ace 10. That's, of course, the Jack, Queen, King board. But our player raises because we've got to open up a bit. Okay, we get called. All right. Now, this is one of the things that you need to do in these games. You need to look for boards that your opponent probably doesn't like. We have the second nut low. It's unlikely our opponent has flat called with ace 4. And it's possible he might have had ace 4 deuce, ace 4 2 3, something like that. It's unlikely he's got 4-5 for a straight to beat us on the high. So we should go ahead and c-bet this, or continuation bet, because we're probably, with our second nut low, we're probably good on the low. And our aces still have a reasonable chance at the high. Okay, so he comes out and bets. I don't mind the size of that bet. It could be a little bit smaller. We don't have to bet that big. We could bet half the pot, slightly less, probably get the same number of folds and calls as that size bet. But anyway, our opponent does fold, and this is a thing to always look out for. Look out for the flops your opponent doesn't like. When he's called a raise, he's usually going to have an ace 3, ace deuce type hand, and his low is going to get counterfeited often on a 2-3 board. So we don't mind that we don't have the nut low. We go ahead and bet it. All right, let's move along. Okay, here we are a little while later. Let's see what happens here. Now we raise from the cutoff. This is combination of a steal and sort of value bet. We don't mind isolating this short stack over here in the big blind. If the big stack comes over the top, we're going to fold. Otherwise, let's see what happens here. Okay, they all folded. And, perfectly good hand to be stealing with from late position, even though, ace 5 isn't the greatest low. And as I said before, we really need to start opening up a fair bit when we're getting short-handed. Otherwise, those blinds eat you up real fast. Okay, let's move along. All right, very next hand. See, and again, coming in for a raise. Notice that we don't limp very often when the stacks are getting short. There's a lot of players here with under 10 blinds. So if we're going to play a pot against any of those short stacks, we'd rather get it all in pre-flop. So let's see what happens. They all fold again. And again, this is a case of opening up a bit. Again, we had an 8 in our hand, which is pretty much dead weight. It's really not helping our hand much at all. I mean, it loosely connects with the 5, but still, as I said, we have to open up at this stage of the game. Anyway, let's move along. A little while later, see what happens here. We've still got a bunch of short stacks on our table. Okay. Now, our hand looks a bit weak here. Ace, King, 8, 4. Again, we've got one of those terrible 8s. And you should by now know that 6, 7, 8, 9, they're the sort of cards you really don't want to see in your hand. And the reason being, hands like 6, 7, 8, 9, although they play well in Omaha High, they don't play very well in a split pot game, because if you make a straight with these sorts of cards, the middle level cards, mid-sized cards, you either make the high end of the straight, which means there has to be a low on the board and you only get half the pot, or if there's no low on the board, it's because you've made the arse end of the straight, and you're probably going to be beaten by a higher straight. But anyway, in this hand, what we're doing here, our player is isolating the short stack. He's got to be desperate at this stage, so we figure our equity stacks up reasonably well against the sort of desperation hands he's going to go with. The isolation works. Okay, he's at the top end of his range. He's got ace deuce. Play it out. On this occasion, it didn't entirely work out. We got courted, but still, we've let the table know something about our range. And this is at the bottom end of our player's range for that type of isolation raise. So, we've set up a bit of a loose aggressive image here. Well, we already had it, but we're reinforcing that. It will make players, it makes these short stacks who are timid players. This guy pro poker over here, this nausea guy, it makes those timid players even more timid when it comes to playing against us. So anyway, let's move along. Okay, so it's a little while later, and the player over here, pro poker, he's gone. So we're down to 6, and we've pulled up a pretty damn good hand under the gun for this stage of the game. Let's see what our player does. Brings it in for a raise. Okay, and the big blind calls. Now, we've flopped the nut low. We've got a pair of aces. Let's see what happens here. Comes out and bets the pot. I quite like that bet. This is because, again, this is one of those flops that your opponent probably doesn't like an erased pot. If he had just ace deuce or ace 3, he knows he's got a serious problem playing this pot against us out of position without knowing where he is at in the low. Of course, we have the nut low. So the whole point here is that we want to drive out high hands who might steal the high half of the pot from us. Oh, and he pops it. And of course, we're not folding these odds. And it turns out, well, our opponent has almost exactly the same hand. Okay, so split pot there. Sometimes it happens. I'm actually surprised that our opponent didn't get that in pre-flop. If I was this guy down here, this Dominic 81 here, I would have got that in pre-flop. I mean, let's just go back and look at the stack sizes. He's got just under 12 blinds. He absolutely should have been putting that in pre-flop. Okay, let's move along. All right, here we are. Let's see what happens. Okay, a short stack, and the small blind open limps to us. I often like to raise in this spot because it's coming from a short stack that's incredibly weak. But we saw him playing weak before when he didn't jam, when he didn't re-raise pre-flop when he should have. But we're going to check here because we're just a little bit too weak for that play. All right, now opponent checks. Our player comes out and bets a bit more than half the pot. I really like this. If our opponent had any kind of ace-deuce type hand, he would have brought it in for a raise, you'd have to think. We've got a pair, we've got a straight draw, and because he doesn't have an ace-deuce, most likely doesn't have an ace-deuce type hand, he probably doesn't like his low. So our 6-5 low draw is probably good for the low. Our opponent folds anyway. That's well played, recognising that this player had to be in a weak position and kind of like that board much. So taking it down there on the flop was good play. Let's move along. Okay, it's a few hands later. Another player has gone. We're down to 5 players now. We've pulled up a pretty good hand for 5-handed under the gun. Bring it in for a raise. Okay, short stack on our right calls. All right, we don't catch a lot on that flop, but our player goes ahead and bets it. And the reason for this is, you know, we do have some outs. There's no low draw yet. We've got a small flush draw, and as you get short-handed, smaller flushes become playable. The gut shot, of course, for the straight, but most importantly, it's got to do with stack sizes. The reason this is a good play. Dominic here, as we've seen before, he's been playing a bit soft. He really doesn't want. He's trying to limp up into the money. Another spot in the money. He doesn't want to bust out before this incredibly short stack down here busts out. So we can push Dominic around. He's out of position every time he plays against us. Except in those cases when we're on the small blind. So yeah, this is a really good bet. Let's see what our opponent does. He folds. Again, by the way, I forgot to mention that's the type of board that he probably doesn't like. Being the timid player that he is, he's probably called out of position with an ace-deuce type hand. He's missed a low board, and so he just gives it up. That's well played and good recognition of the fact that this guy here is playing weakly and doesn't want to bust, so we can push him around. Anyway, let's continue on. Okay, it's a bit later, and that short stack is finally busted out. We're on the button with an ace-4, 7-7 hand. Let's see what happens here. Our player brings it in for a raise. Perfectly good hand to be stealing with. Okay, now we get 3-bet. Now, that sort of ICM situation we were talking about before, where Dominic didn't want to bust before the short stack, that now applies to us. We don't really want to play this hand, so we'll see what happens. Yeah, he folds, and that's the right play. Now, note that before doing that, our player knew that even if he had to raise fold, he was still going to be an advantage against Dominic in terms of prize money, because the prize money is starting to make a difference now. Once you get down to the last 4 and 3 places, one more step up makes a significant difference. So that was a good attempt at a steal. Didn't work out. Folded it correctly. Let's move along. Okay, our player's picked up a monster for this situation. Ace King 4 deuce, double suited hand. Let's see what he does. All right, he's changed his tune. Instead of min raising, he's raising pot now, and that's because with a hand this strong, short-handed, even though he might put himself at risk of busting before this player down here, remember there are still higher places. We're not trying to just limp into third here. We're also trying to win the tournament. So, and with a monster hand like this short-handed, you absolutely want to get as many chips in as you can. Oh, unfortunately, it doesn't get called. But yes, well played there. Let's go along. Okay, we're still 4-handed. We still have a chip lead over the guy in fourth. And he finally opens for a raise. What does our player do? Yes, good play there. He's re-raising. He's happy to get stacks in. Now, at first glance, our hand looks a bit weak with ace 7-6 for a low. But it's sort of reasonably well connected, and we have got a heart draw. And also, Dominic is changing up his game now. Now, he knows he's super desperate. He knows there's no point in him trying to fold anymore. So he will be opening much wider than he normally does. And he comes in and, yes, okay, so he's got a better low than us. Let's see how it plays out. and it didn't work out for our opponent so well. Well, he got half the pot. Yes, so it was well played there. Taking a shot at doubling up, because remember, we don't just want to limp into third. We'd be really happy to have doubled up there to have a shot at second and first. Anyway, let's move along. Okay, so it's a little while later now, and the other guy's busted, and we're super desperate with just over 8 blinds in our stack. Any 2 wheel cards, any 2 low cards. In fact, we're going to play some high-only hands like Ace, King, Jack 10, hands like that we'd be trying to play. So let's see what our player does. Raises pot, of course, because he wants to be committed. He wants to play for stacks. There's no point in waiting around. Okay, they only fold, unfortunately. All right. Let's move right along to the next one. Okay, we picked up an even better hand. Same situation still applies. Let's see what happens. Okay, it gets raised. He pots it, wants to play for stacks, gets it all in, and yeah, not a bad situation. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out this time. Our opponent has beaten us. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this little final table review and seeing some examples of really opening up the hand ranges as the number of players get smaller and smaller, being aware of the different stack sizes and how they influence not only our play, but influence our opponent's play, and how that in turn lets us play against those guys, especially those ones who are timid and trying not to bust out. Anyway, if you'd like to know more about what we do at Team 08, just check us out on the website, team08.com. Thanks and bye for now.